Hi, I'm Travis Elliott with National Control Devices, and welcome back to my desk for the third part of the Reactor Logic series. Now, in the last video, we showed you how inputs work, how to connect things to the inputs, and how the reactor actually views an input. So in this video, we're going to talk about events, okay? Now, I want to go ahead and recap real quick on the three main keys of the reactor. Remember, we had inputs, events, and relays, also known as output. Okay, we already covered inputs, so you pretty well know what that is. We're getting ready to cover events, and then we're going to cover relays. Okay, so let's go ahead and get in here and start talking about events. Now, to start with, before we actually talk about events and how they work and all that, let's talk about how logic travels through the reactor and actually triggers events and how events trigger other things to happen. Okay? So here in the middle we would have an event, like a timer or a rotation or something of that matter. Okay? There are two ways that you can trigger an event to start. The first one is with an input directly. Okay? You can push a button or trigger an input which will start an event. You can also trigger an event with another event. Okay? Anytime you trigger an event with another event, that's called event piping. Okay? All right. So those are the two different ways that you can trigger an event on a reactor or key fob controller. Now, there are two things that an event can trigger to happen also. Okay? An event can trigger a relay directly. Okay, so a timer could trigger a relay to come on, or a rotation could trigger a relay. An event, of course, can also trigger another event. So you can almost see how this could be an endless cycle of things triggering other things inside the reactor. You saw in the last video we triggered a timer with a button that turned on a relay. Okay, so we triggered the input, which was the button, which started the timer, which was the event, which triggered the relay. Okay, so that's really a pretty simple way of using an event to trigger a relay. Now, what if we wanted to use event piping real quick here? Let's set up a time-delayed relay so that whenever I push a button, it's going to wait 10 seconds, and then it's going to turn a relay on for 5 seconds, and then the relay is going to go back off again. That would be an input triggering an event, which triggers another event, which is my second timer, triggering the relay. So you have the input triggers the first timer, which it just waits for a few seconds, and then that timer, at the end of that timer, triggers another timer, which turns on a relay for 5 seconds. So let's show you a little clip of that here, and remember, this is an event-piped event, okay? So here's the clip. In this video, I'll show you a time-delayed relay. As soon as the button is pushed, timer 1 starts. A few seconds later, it ends and starts timer 2, which turns on the relay for a few seconds. After timer 2 runs out, the relay goes off and the cycle is finished. Okay, so that was a pretty simple little event pipe scheme, but you got to see event piping working. So let's go ahead and move on now. You've got an idea of what can trigger an event. and what an event can trigger. All right, so that's a good start here. Let's go ahead and talk about a timer. Okay, well, oh wait, there are 3 different types of events. Okay, the first one is a timer. As you just saw, we used a couple of timers to trigger a relay. Okay, the second one is a rotation. A rotation is nothing more than a counter, and we'll get into that more here in a minute. The third one is a timer rotation. These are the 3 different types of events that you can use in the reactor controller. You'll be able to see these on the configuration utility, and you'll get a really good idea of exactly what they are and how you configure them whenever we get there. But I just kind of want to explain them real basically here, okay? Let's start off with a timer. Now, you've already got a pretty good idea of how a timer works in a reactor. We talked about timers a little bit in the input video, and we just showed you a timer in a little clip back there. So, some things you need to know about timers. First thing is that you have 8 timers at your disposal. Okay? You have timers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Each of those timers can be viewed in your configuration utility, and you can set the duration of that timer. Okay? That's really all you can change on the timer itself. You can tell it you are a 30-second timer. So we'd say timer 1's a 30-second timer. Timer 2 is a 2-minute timer. Timer 3 is a 4-hour timer. Timer 5 is a 6-hour, 35 minutes, and 45-second timer. Just pretty much anything you can think of. We didn't put days on there, but let's not get carried away. So those are your timers, okay? And you have 8 of them. And they are user, being you, configurable. So you can set them to any amount of time you want using the configuration utility. And I'll show you that on the configuration video, and you'll get a real good idea of exactly how to do that. But as far as timers go, that's really all there is to them. I mean, they're not very complicated. At the end of a timer, you can tell it to trigger another event, like event piping. You can have it trigger another timer or a rotation or a timer rotation. You can have it control a relay directly. Like I said, you'll get a firmer grasp on that by the time we get through all of this. I just want to get it in your head for now. So that's timers. Okay, we won't spend a whole lot of time on that. I think you've kind of got an idea already of how those work. The next one is rotations. Now I've kind of tiptoed around rotations throughout these videos. The reason is we really need to sit down here and talk about a rotation and what it is. Now, as I've said earlier, a rotation is nothing but a counter, okay? And a rotation can count to 9 at the most, okay? So whenever I say count, it's just the same as you would count to 9. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The thing about a rotation is on each one of those individual counts, you can trigger a relay. You can turn on or turn off a relay, or turn on multiple relays, or turn off multiple relays. Okay? So we have a rotation, and we know it's a counter that counts from 0 to 9. Okay? And on each one of these counts, we can trigger a relay. However, you cannot trigger a relay on the 0 count. At 0, all of your relays are going to go off automatically. That's just the way rotations work. At 0, your relays are going to go off. Okay? At any other one of these numbers, I can turn on a relay. I could say on step 1, let's turn on relay 1. On step 2, let's turn on relay 2. On step 3, let's turn on relays 5 and 6. Okay? On step 4, we could turn off relays 1 and 2. I mean, pretty much anything that you want to do, you can trigger timers on a step of a rotation. Okay? Now, things that are configurable about a rotation, things that you can change using the configuration utility. You can change the number of counts in a rotation. If I just need 3 counts in my rotation, then I just say, this is a 3-count rotation. And now it only counts from 0 to 3. Simple enough. I should also mention that you have 4 rotations at your disposal. Just as you have 8 timers, you have 4 rotations. They are rotations A, B, C, and D. Okay? Those are your 4 rotations. And they can be any length from 0 to 9. And you can trigger relays at any point. At the end of a rotation, you can trigger another event piping. You can't trigger another event in the middle of a rotation. Or any of these intermediate steps, you cannot trigger another event. Only on the last count of a rotation can you trigger another event. Okay? Now, there's a couple of different types of rotations. I'm not going to go into all of them. Let's just say we're going to talk about incremental rotations and auto rotations. First one, incremental rotation, means the rotation counts forward or backwards depending on my input. So I could say input 1 increases rotation A. Okay? So if I trigger input 1, it's going to increase rotation A. Let's just draw one up real quick. We'll say rotation A here is a 4-count rotation. If I push input 1, it's going to go from 0 to 1. Okay? It's going to step forward 1 count. If I push input 1 again, it's going to go to 2. If I push it again, it's going to go to 3. Push it again, it's going to go to 4. Now, one thing you need to know about a rotation is if I'm on 4, the 4th count, the final count of the rotation, and I say increase the rotation, it's going to recycle back to 0. Automatically, by default, that's how it's set up. If you increase past the upper limit of a rotation, it's going to recycle. However, there is a setting on each of these rotations to tell it to halt on upper and lower limits, which means it's going to stop at 0 and 4. So if I get to 4 and I say increase rotation, it won't do anything. It's just going to stay on the 4th count because I told it to halt on upper and lower limits. Now, just as we used input 1 to increase the rotation, we could use input 2 to decrease the rotation. So if I'm on the 4th count here and I see decrease the rotation with input 2, it's going to go back to 3. Okay? And basically work just the same as the other one did. So that's an incremental rotation. And we'll go ahead and show you a clip here of a manually triggered incremental rotation where you just push the button and it advances through the rotation. So here's that clip. Okay, so that was an incremental rotation. Now let's talk about an auto rotation. An auto rotation is just something that you start, okay? It's kind of the same as the other one. We could say rotation B is an auto rotation. Or we can say it has 5 counts. okay? And we could say input 1 starts the rotation. Rotation B. This is rotation B. And it's an auto rotation. Now, whenever I start an auto rotation, it's just going to start running through this automatically. It's just going to go from 0 to 5 and then repeat, go from 0 to 5 and repeat. And it's just going to count through those steps. And I could have, each one of these steps tied to a relay. This would be good if you wanted to have a light flash on and off for an alarm. You start it, and the light flashes on and off until you tell it to stop. So here we'll show you an auto rotation. The rotation is started with the button on the left, and it just runs until it's stopped. If you push the button again, it'll actually restart the rotation at the 0 count. If you push the second button, it stops the rotation, which pauses it right in its place. So that's basically an auto rotation, not a whole lot to that. It's just going to count through there, and that's about all there is to it, okay? So you've got an idea of what a rotation is and how it works. You probably don't know when in the world you're ever going to use that for something, but I can tell you most of the applications we come up with here, you use a rotation. It's actually a very reliable way to accomplish some of the tasks with the reactor. So you'll find yourself using the rotation. We're going to do some application videos and pages. So you'll actually be able to see them being used in real applications, and then you'll have a lot firmer grasp on what you use them for. And as we advance through this, you're going to know more and more, and by the end of it, you're going to be using rotations, I guarantee it. So now we've talked about timers, we've talked about rotations. Now let's talk about timer rotations. Okay. A timer rotation is nothing more than a rotation that runs for a certain amount of time. You start it and it runs, just like an auto rotation. Same thing. But I have an amount of time that I can program. So I can say this is a 30-second auto timer rotation. Okay? 30 seconds. So you can set the duration of the timer rotation for however long you want. Then you can set the number of counts in the rotation. We'll make this one a 5-count rotation. Then you can tie those counts to relays. You can have them control relays. Okay? And whenever I start the rotation, it's going to run for a specific amount of time, and it's going to cycle through here just like an auto rotation does, and it's going to continue to cycle for 30 seconds. After the 30 seconds is up, it's going to go off, and that's really all there is to it. You can set the amount of time that it waits on each of these steps. If I just start this, it's going to go really fast, because by default it's going to go as fast as possible. You can set the speed on a scale from 0 to 255. 255 being as fast as it can go and 0 being as slow as it can go. So whenever it gets to 1, if I want it to hold that relay on for a long time, I would set it to 0. And then it's going to wait on count 1, and it's going to move to step 2. And it's going to move to step 3, and then to 4, and so on. If I want it to run really, really fast, I'll set it to 255, and it's just going to go through these really quick. So the amount of time it spends on each step of the count is programmable with this scale. And once again, we'll show you that in the configuration program, and that'll make it real easy for you to understand that as well. I just want you to have an idea of what a timer rotation is before we get into that. Okay, so we've covered timers. That one's really easy. We've covered rotations. You've got an idea how those work. You don't know when in the world you're ever going to use them. And then you've got timer rotations. Okay, we'll go ahead and show you a clip here of a timer rotation running. And it's just going to cycle through a rotation, turning relays on and off and on and off and on and off for a specific amount of time, and then it's just going to stop and all the relays are going to go off. So here's that clip. Here we'll show you a timer rotation. You'll see when the button is pushed, the timer rotation starts. It runs through the rotation until the timer runs out, and then all the relays go off. This is the end of the timer rotation. Alright, so that's pretty much all there is to that. So, that's pretty much the events. You know, if you caught all that, you're really well on your way, and we'll do the next video and we'll talk about relays, and that's going to be easy because relays are just switches, nothing fancy. So we've got events covered. We're going to move on to relays next, and then we're going to move on to configuration utility, and then we'll be able to do some applications and actually have some fun with this thing for once. So be sure and stay tuned.